Greetings, statistics scholars, and welcome to this second in our series of videos on chapter number 2, which deals with describing data that we've collected. In our previous video, we took a deeper dive into looking at categorical variables. In this video and in the one that follows, we'll be taking a closer look at quantitative variables. Let's begin by taking a look at the data set that was included as one of our items of interest in the previous video. This is the population of pirate infielders from the year 2019. We had 11 of them, and you might recall that we had established that the height variable and the weight variable were quantitative variables. Whenever we have a quantitative variable, some of the things that we're particularly interested in talking about are measures of center. How would we describe to someone what is a typical data value for a particular quantitative variable? Well, one way to do that is to tell somebody the mean of that data set. The word mean is a synonym for average. So whenever we talk about reporting the mean of a data set, we're talking about adding together the data values and then dividing by the total number of values. This is one very common way of describing what is typical or central for a particular variable. Another equally commonly used measure of center is what we call the median of the data set. If we put all of the data values in our collection into increasing order, from smallest to largest, and then take a look at the middlemost value in that list. That is what we will refer to as the median of the data set. And that's another way of talking about what is typical for the data set, to look for that middle value when the items are listed in increasing order. Now, sometimes you may have a data set that has an even number of values. In this case, there's not just one middle value, but two middle values. And what we do in that case is we report the average of those two middle values as the median. Let's take a look at computing some means and medians. First of all, using this data set of the pirate infielders. Here you can see that I've listed out the heights of the 11 pirate infielders in increasing order. The shortest pirate infielders were 5 feet 10 or 70 inches, up to the very tallest pirate infielders who were 6 feet 4 or 76 inches. When we list those heights in increasing order from smallest to largest, we can see that the number 72 is directly in the middle. There are 5 data values that are listed to the left of that, and 5 data values listed to the right. And what that tells us is that that is the median height for the pirate infielders from 2019. Their median height was 72 inches. Now let's take a look at an example of finding a mean. The mean for the weights. How would we find that? Well, remember that the mean is found by adding together the values and then dividing that sum by the number of values. In this case here, the weights were 240, 180, 180, 205, and so on and so forth. When I add together those 11 weights, I find out that altogether the pirate infielders weighed just a little over 1 ton, 2,245 pounds. Now, when we divide that sum by 11, which was the number of infielders, we get a mean value of 204.09 pounds. That would be the mean for that population. In statistics, we have certain symbols that we use to designate quantities. In this case here, we use the Greek letter mu to represent any population mean that we're interested in. So since this was an average from an entire population, we would say that mu equals 204.09. 24.09. That is the population mean for the weights of the pirate infielders. Now, oftentimes it's going to be very helpful to use technology to help find and compute means and medians. In an upcoming video, we're going to take a look at the StatKey app, which goes along with our textbook. It can be a very convenient and valuable tool for helping to compute statistics and also doing a host of other things. For purposes of this video, I've put a website up on the screen. There's an applet on this website that is pretty intuitive to use to find means and medians and other commonly used statistics. I'd like to commend it to you for doing some practice this week. If you go to that website, you'll see that there's a place for entering data into cells. And you can see here that I've illustrated entering in the weights for the pirate infielders in those cells. Once you enter in your data set into the cells using the Data tab, if you then just click on the Statistics tab, you'll see a report that's been generated by that applet. And you can see here that in addition to telling us that column A had 11 data points, it has reported that the mean of those data values was 204.09, which is exactly, of course, the value that we had found on the previous slide. I'd like to recommend that you spend some time early this week playing around with this applet on the web to get some practice for finding means and medians for small data sets. Let's take a look at another smaller size data set here, the second of our 3 data sets for this video. This comes to us from the Handbook of Small Data Sets. In September of 1990, over the course of 24 nights, someone kept track of how many moths were trapped in an ultraviolet trap at a certain location in England. And you can see the data values listed here. 47 moths caught on one night, 21 moths caught on another night, then 16, and so on and so forth. Numbers of moths caught is very clearly a quantitative variable, isn't it? We could, for example, talk about the difference between the maximum number of moths caught, which was 71, and the minimum number of moths caught, which was 16. We could say that there was a difference of 55 moths between the maximum and the minimum, which is a value that we call the range of the data set. But number of moths is a quantitative variable. And one of the things that we can do for visualizing a quantitative variable is to create something that's known as a dot plot. A dot plot is simply a number line. And here you can see we've labeled our number line as number of moths trapped. It's simply a number line that has a dot above every data value that existed. So here, since there was one night when 16 moths were caught, you can see we have a dot above 16. There was one night when 19 moths were caught, so there's a dot above 19. Notice that there's 3 dots above 21. That's because we had 3 distinct different nights in which 21 moths were caught. And notice that there's 2 dots above the number 24. That signifies the fact that there were 2 nights on which 24 moths were caught, and so on and so forth. A dot plot can be a useful strategy for visualizing a small quantitative data set. Let's practice with our words mean and median. What would be the median of this sample moth data? Well, remember we had 24 nights altogether. So that means that we have an even number of data values here. And that means there's not just going to be one middle value here, but 2. To help find which values are in the middle, our dot plot is actually quite useful. I can very easily visually find, for example, the smallest 10 data values in the set and the largest 10 data values in the set. They're the ones that are at the far left and the far right. And now I can see the middle 4 values here. Of course, the median is the average of the middle two values. Well, the middle four values are 34, 34, 37, and 37. So that means now I know what the median is. The median is going to be the average of 34 and 37, which is 35 and a half. That's our median number of moths caught for this particular experiment, or observational study, rather. What is the mean of this sample moth data? What is the average? Well, if we total up the number of moths caught over all 24 nights, we're going to find out that 885 moths were caught altogether over the course of this study. Notice the symbolism. We use the Greek letter sigma, and if we say sigma x, we're talking about the sum of all the data values. The sum of the data values was 885. Now we're going to find our average, or our mean, by dividing that by 24. But now we're going to introduce an additional bit of terminology or notation here. In statistics, when we want to talk about the average or the mean from a sample, we use the symbol X with a line over it. And this is read as X bar. X bar refers to the mean of a sample, whereas mu, the Greek letter that we saw earlier, talks about the mean of an entire population if we have just a sample. And here we do, because we clearly haven't totaled up how many moths were caught over all possible nights. This was just a group of 24 particular nights. So this is a sample of data. And so we're going to label the average not with mu, but with X bar. And here we would say that X bar is 885 divided by 24 for a sample mean of 36.875. Notice here, parenthetically, that the sample mean here is a little bit larger than the median in this particular case. For a final example here, we're going to take a look at another data set from the Handbook of Small Data Sets dealing with wooden toy prices. In April of 1991, someone went to a Suffolk craft shop and found the prices of all 31 children's wooden toys that were on sale. And you see these 31 prices listed. These are in pounds. So for example, one of the wooden toys cost 4 pounds and 20 pence. There was another wooden toy that cost 1 pound and 12 pence. Another wooden toy cost 1 pound and 39 pence, and so on and so forth. We had prices that were as small as just 50 pence, and some that were as large as 12 pounds and 20 pence. What if we wanted to try to summarize this data? Well, a quick investigation shows that we had 4 toys that cost at least 0 pence, but less than 1. We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 toys that cost at least one pound, but less than 2. We had 1, 2, 3, 4 that cost at least 2 pounds, but less than 3. We had a pair of toys that cost at least 3 pounds, but less than 4. We had another pair of toys that cost at least 4 pounds, but less than 5. Another pair of toys that cost at least 5 pounds, but less than 6. And then from there on, one toy that cost at least 6 pounds, but less than 7. One toy that cost at least 7 pounds, but less than 8. And so on and so forth. When we take a look at all of that data, we can create something that we call a histogram to show the distribution of those toy prices. Notice here I've made a bar graph, and that's what a histogram is. It's a bar graph showing a quantitative variable's frequency. What I've done here is we've created what we call some classes. We have a first class that starts at 0 pounds, a next class that starts at 1 pound, a third class that starts at 2 pounds, a fourth class that starts at 3 pounds. And every one of the classes has a width of 1 pound. You can see here the frequencies for our various classes. For the category of at least 0 but less than 1, we see a frequency of 4. For at least 1 pound but less than 2, we had a frequency of 9. For at least 2 pounds but less than 3, we had a frequency of 4. And so on and so forth. This is a bar graph that shows the distribution of those data values for this quantitative variable. Now, of course, having that class width of 1 pound, as we were using, isn't the only way that we could divide up the data. Suppose, for example, that instead of using a class width of 1 pound, we decided to use a class width of 1 pound and 25 pence. If we did this, then our first class wouldn't go from 0 to up to, but not including 1. It would go from 0 pounds up to, but not including 1 pound 25 pence. And then our next category would start at 1 pound 25 pence and go up to, but not including, 2 pounds and 50 pence. You can see by using a larger class width, we're going to end up with a slightly smaller number of bars in doing so. And the picture looks a little different. Now, that's telling us that there's not just one histogram or bar graph that we can make. It's a matter of deciding how wide we want each of our classes to be and how many classes we'd like to have. The wider the classes are, the fewer the classes we're going to have. How many should we have? It's customary when you're creating a histogram, usually to have somewhere between 5 and 20 bars in a histogram. There's no one right way to do it. It's the matter of choice for the person creating the bar graph. But we want to remember that histogram is a vocabulary word that we use to talk about a bar graph for a quantitative data variable. Last thing we want to talk about in this video here, now that we've introduced the idea of a histogram, is to talk about shapes of data sets. Here's some histograms here for some different data variables. And you can see that they have different shapes to them. And it's going to be useful for us going forward to have some basic vocabulary to describe how a data set is distributed. Look at data set A there in the upper left. That data set is one that we refer to as a right-skewed data set. Why? Because the highest bar there is toward the left side of the distribution, and what we might call the tail on the right-hand side stretches out farther than the tail on the left side does. So we refer to this as a right-skewed data set. Just beside it, data set B is an example of what we call a left-skewed data set. Notice that the peak there is right at 5, and notice that there are more bars or a longer tail to the left of that high point in the distribution, whereas there are 4 bars that are to the left of the bar at 5. There's only 1 bar to its right. So because of this, we say that data set B has a longer left tail and is left skewed. Now in the case of C, we see a symmetry there. The peak in the data set is at 3, and then on both sides, the data set kind of falls off at roughly the same rate. This is what we refer to as a symmetric data set. These are going to be 3 important words that we'll have going forward to describe the histogram or the shape of a data set, right skewed, left skewed, and symmetric. With those vocabulary words in hand, let's return to our histograms that we had for the toy prices. Looking at those histograms, we could ask the question, how should we describe the shape of this data set? To answer that, we want to take a look at where the peak occurs. There's a very obvious peak that is occurring in the second bar. In the histogram on the left, it's the class that is the toys that were at least 1 but less than 2 pounds. And in the histogram on the right, it's the toys that were at least 1 pound 25 pence but less than 2 pounds and 50 pence. That second bar represents the peak of our data set. Are things symmetric about that peak? Obviously not. There is a much longer right tail than there is for a left tail for this. So because of this, we're going to refer to the shape of this data set as being right skewed. So those are some important things